Arizona Territory, 1879. The sun had barely crested the Mogollon Rim when Seth Whitlow rode into the town of Hollow Bend and saw her. She was chained in the street. A woman, no younger than 20, barefoot and bruised, with wrists shackled to a hitching post like she was something less than human. Her dress was torn, her lips split. Her hair hung in matted curls, but her eyes were fire. Not broken, not begging, just burning. Seth stopped dead in the middle of Main Street. His horse, a chestnut gelding named Boone, pawed the dirt beneath him. A boy no older than 9 stood by the saloon steps, clutching the hand of a smaller girl. Their cheeks were smudged with dust, eyes wide and wild like they had not slept right in days. The boy looked from the chained woman to Seth. "That's our ma," he said, voice thin and scared. "They said she stole. They ain't letting her go." Seth dismounted in one clean motion. "Where's the sheriff?" The boy pointed toward the boarding house. "Drunk," he whispered. Seth looked back at the woman. "What's your name?" Her voice was hoarse but solid. "Joetta." "Joetta Tilden." He nodded once. "Seth Whitlow." She didn't say anything to that, just stared at him like she was weighing something heavy inside. Seth turned on his heel and strode toward the general store. A group of men stood around, pretending not to look. One of them, broad-shouldered, gut hanging over his belt, spit in the dirt. "Best keep riding, cowboy," the man said. Seth didn't slow. "Who gave the order to chain her?" "Sheriff did. She tried to run off with supplies, claimed she was owed. She got 2 kids," Seth said flatly. "And she don't belong in chains." Another man laughed. "She's lucky we didn't string her up." Seth drew his revolver without blinking. "Unchain her." The laughter cut out like a blade through rope. "I said unchain her." His voice was calm, steady, but something in it made the men shift like dogs that had just remembered their teeth were not the biggest in the yard. One of the men, a wiry one with a nervous mouth, stepped forward, fumbled for a key, and unlocked the shackles. Joetta slumped forward but caught herself before she hit the ground. Seth dropped to a knee beside her, pulling a clean handkerchief from his coat pocket. He held it out. She took it without a word and pressed it to her lip. The boy and girl ran to her, hugging her legs. "Camden, Kira," she whispered, smoothing their hair. Seth watched her a moment. "You got somewhere to go?" She looked up at him. "We did, not anymore," he nodded. "Well, you do now." Joetta squinted against the morning sun. "Why are you helping us?" Seth stood and offered her his hand. "Because no one should treat a woman this way." She hesitated, then reached up and took it. He helped her to her feet. She did not lean on him, but he could feel the tremble in her fingers. The kids clung to her skirt. "Where were you headed?" he asked once they were walking. "North," she said. "Bisbee, thought maybe I could find work there. Sewing, cooking, anything. You got family." "Dead," he nodded. "I got a ranch about 10 miles out. You and the kids can stay there, just until you're steady on your feet." She looked over at him, eyes sharp beneath the bruises. "You always take in strangers. Only the ones that deserve better than what they got." Joetta studied him. Then, for the first time, her mouth bent into the faintest shape of something that almost looked like a smile. They rode out of Hollow Bend before the sun got too high. Boone carried Joetta and her daughter while Camden rode with Seth on his mule, Dusty. The town didn't follow. No one came after them. By mid-afternoon, they'd reached Seth's ranch. It was not much, just a small clapboard house tucked against a ridge, a barn, a chicken coop, and a well that sometimes ran slow in summer, but it was clean, and it was quiet. Joetta helped the children down, her hands shaking from exhaustion. Seth led Boone into the barn and came back with a canteen. "Drink," he said gently. She took it. Her throat worked as she swallowed. That night, Seth made stew. Joetta sat on the porch steps with her children curled close on each side. He watched her from the kitchen window as she stared at the stars like they might offer answers. After the kids had gone to bed in the spare room, Joetta stayed on the porch. Seth stepped out, handing her a blanket. She took it, pulling it around her shoulders. "You ever been alone out here before?" he asked. "Not like this," she said quietly. "Not with nothing left." He sat down beside her, boots thudding against the wood. "I lost someone too," he said after a while. "My brother. War took him. After that, everything got quiet, too quiet sometimes." She looked at him. "You never married?" "No." "Never found someone who made it feel right?" Joetta was quiet a long time. The kid's father left when Kira was 3, took off for California, said he'd send money, never did. Seth nodded, not pressing. She looked at him then. You did not have to do what you did. I know. I could have been lying. I could have stolen. I know that too. She turned toward him more fully. Why trust me? Because I saw your kids looking at you like you were the only thing keeping them breathing. And I saw how you held them even with your wrists torn up. That's not a thief. That's a mother. Joetta blinked hard, looking away. The wind moved soft through the mesquites. I am not asking for anything, she said quietly. I am not offering anything you do not want, he replied, just as soft. She glanced at him, eyes tired but clearer now. We will sleep. And in the morning I will help. I can wash, mend, cook. You are not working yet. You rest first. He stood, nodding once. Good night, Joetta. Good night, Seth. Inside, he heard her moving about the kitchen, checking on her children. He lay on his cot in the main room, staring at the ceiling. Boone stirred in the barn. He could still see her face in that street, chained and defiant. And now she was here. And something about that felt like it mattered more than anything had in years. The rooster did not wait for full light before calling the morning, and Joetta was already standing at the basin, sleeves rolled, washing her face with cold well water. Her jaw ached. The split in her lip had tightened overnight, and her shoulders bore the dull throb of days without rest. But the children were still sleeping, and for the first time in weeks, she was not afraid they'd wake to shouting or a locked door. The kitchen was spare but orderly, with a tin coffee pot atop the stove and a bag of cornmeal tucked beside a crock of lard. She found a skillet hanging on the wall, clean and oiled. Her fingers brushed the wooden handle and paused. She hadn't held a pan without her heart in her throat in over a year. Behind her, the door creaked open. Seth stepped in, wiping his hands on a towel, boots dusty from the barn. He carried a sliver of hay behind one ear and the scent of horses and morning air. I was going to start breakfast, Joetta said. I figured you might. He walked to the stove and added wood, but I already fired up the oven. Corn cakes'll cook faster that way. She glanced at him. You always get up this early, don't much sleep past the birds. He handed her a tin of salt. There's dried apples in the bin over there. Kids might like them warm. She nodded and moved to gather them, careful not to disturb the stillness between them. Seth poured coffee into 2 tin cups and leaned against the counter. I've got a mare due to foal before week's end. Might stay in the barn tonight, just in case. Joetta stirred the batter. You do the birthing alone, always have. She turned slightly. You sure you want us here while you've got all that going on? He met her eyes. This ain't charity, I gave my word. That means something. Joetta set the spoon down slowly. In my experience, men who say that usually want something back. I'm not most men. She didn't answer, but her hands moved easier after that. By the time Camden and Kira padded into the room, hair tousled and eyes still heavy with sleep, the smell of apples and cornmeal filled the house. Joetta served them quietly, watching as they ate without hesitation. Their cheeks were fuller already, color returning where fear had hollowed them. Later, while the children played with a length of braided rope out by the water trough, Joetta stood beside Seth as he checked fence posts along the north line. The wind carried the scent of creosote and dust, and somewhere a hawk cried over the hills. You built all this yourself, she asked, watching him test a post for rot. My brother and I started it, he said, bending to pack earth around the base. He didn't make it home from Virginia. After that, it was my hands alone. She crouched beside him, pressing the soil down with a flat stone. You don't talk much about him. No sense talking to silence, he said. It don't talk back. Joetta looked over at him. I used to sew by firelight while my mother told stories. She said if you let the quiet settle too long, it starts to grow teeth. I reckon we're both learning to live with ghosts. She didn't answer, but her hand brushed his as she stood. He didn't move away. That evening, after the children lay curled together beneath a quilt Joetta had mended with leftover flannel, she stepped outside and found Seth oiling his saddle under the porch lantern. You hungry? She asked. He shook his head. Ate earlier. Brought the mare in by the barn. She's restless. She sat on the edge of the porch, arms around her knees. Camden asked today if this place is ours now. Seth paused, then set the oilcloth aside. What you tell him? I said it's not ours, but we're safe here, for now. He leaned back against the post. You can stay as long as you need, no questions, no debt. Joetta turned toward him. What if what I need is more than a place to sleep? Seth studied her a long moment. Then I hope you'll say what that is. She looked down. I don't know yet. That's fair. The lantern light shifted with the breeze. The silence between them was not empty, it was waiting. I used to think if I kept moving, I'd outrun what happened back in Kansas, she said after a while. But it follows, the things men take. The things they leave behind. Seth's voice was low. You're not what they tried to make you. Her hands clenched around her skirt. I don't want to be someone who's always looking over her shoulder. You're not here, she lifted her eyes. And you. What do you want, Seth? He didn't answer right away. Then, something that don't disappear when the wind changes. Joetta stood slowly, knees stiff from crouching. Then I guess we're both trying to stay still for once. Seth rose too, standing beside her, close but not touching. We'll figure it one day at a time, he said. She nodded. I think I'd like that. They stood in the warm dark, the sound of crickets rising in the grass. The door behind them stayed open just a crack, enough for the light to spill out and remind them whatever came next. They weren't walking toward it alone. The mare foaled just before dawn, and Seth stayed with her until the first light pooled low over the ridge. He covered the stall with fresh straw, rubbed the newborn colt down with a burlap sack, and made sure the mother stood steady before heading back to the house. Joetta was already outside, crouched near the well with her daughter's dress draped over a washboard. Her hands moved methodically, knuckles red from cold water, hair tucked beneath a kerchief. She didn't glance up when Seth approached, but her mouth moved slightly as though counting each stroke. The colt's good, he said. Strong legs, wide chest. Might be something special. Joetta wrung out the cloth and hung it over the rail. Kira's never seen a horse that small. She'll want to name it. Let her. It'll give her something to hold on to. Joetta rose slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. You got a name for it already, Seth shrugged. Figured I'd wait and see what kind of temper it's got. She nodded, then glanced toward the barn. That mare, you think she'd let me close? You'd know quick if she wouldn't. You want to try? I handled mules for the army wagon trains during the drought years. They can be meaner than horses, but if you know when to back off, you don't get kicked. Seth studied her a moment. You worked with freighters, did what I had to, took whatever came. He held the barn door open for her. The mare flicked an ear when they entered but didn't shift. The colt wobbled by her flank, dark legs splayed like reeds in wind. Joetta moved slowly, palms open, voice low. Back in Kansas, there was a man used to break horses with ropes and fear, said it was the only way to make him listen. I never understood that, neither did I. She crouched just outside the stall watching the colt nurse. This one'll need patience. Most do. Joetta turned her head slightly. You ever think about leaving this place? Seth leaned against the beam, arms crossed. Used to. When the roof leaked and the well went dry, but something kept me here. What? Didn't know. Maybe I do now. Joetta didn't look at him, but her fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the stall gate. That night, Seth brought in an old chest from the attic. He set it by the hearth and dusted it off while Joetta sliced potatoes thin for the pan. I forgot I had this, he said. Been sittin' up there since the fire. Joetta glanced over. Fire, 2 summers back. Lightning struck the east fence, took the shed and near half the barn. Lost most of my brother's things. She set the knife down gently. You ever talk about him? What he was like? Seth lifted the lid and pulled out a folded wool shirt. He was louder than me, laughed easier, took risks I never would have. But he had a way of looking at people like he saw the best parts, even when they didn't. Joetta sat across from him, hands in her lap. Camden's starting to ask about things I can't explain, why his father left, why we kept running. You tell him the truth, I try. But I don't know how to tell a boy he wasn't the reason someone gave up. Seth set the shirt aside. You keep showing up, you feed him, protect him, that's what he'll remember. She looked down at her hands. I want to believe that. He reached into the chest again and pulled out a small wooden box worn at the corners. Inside, a few letters, a rusted harmonica, and a faded daguerreotype of 2 young men, one with a crooked grin, the other quiet-eyed and steady. Joetta leaned closer. That him? Seth nodded. He was 19 there. We just claimed this land. He looks like he'd have driven you crazy. He did. She smiled faintly. You miss him. Every day, Joetta didn't speak for a while. Then, you ever think about what comes next? Seth looked up. With the ranch, with us. His brow furrowed, she cleared her throat. I mean, I don't know what you're expecting. I'm not polished. I don't know how to fit inside someone else's life without making noise. I don't want quiet. I want honest. And I don't expect anything you don't want to give. Joetta drew a slow breath. I don't have much left to offer. You've got your word, your fight, your care. That's more than most. She stood, moving to the hearth. The fire crackled low, casting gold across her face. I never thought I'd want to stay anywhere again. Seth rose too. You don't have to decide now. I'm not afraid of deciding, she said softly. I'm afraid of getting used to peace and then losing it. He stepped beside her. I won't take it from you. Her eyes met his. Then maybe I'll start believing in it. They stood in the warmth, the weight of what hadn't been said settling into something steady between them. Outside, the wind pressed gently against the house, and the colt in the barn gave a soft, uncertain whinny, the first sound of something new learning how to belong. The rains came early that spring. It wasn't a downpour, just a steady, quiet soaking that turned the dust to clay and filled the air with the scent of wet sage and mesquite. Joetta stood by the back stoop, sleeves rolled, watching the drops thread down from the eaves. Kira and Camden had fallen asleep on a pallet by the hearth after supper, their limbs tangled like puppies, bellies full of beans and skillet bread. Seth was on the porch, oiling the hinges of the screen door. His shirt stuck to his back in places, rain catching in the folds. Joetta stepped out with a towel. You'll rust if you keep that up, she said, holding it out. He took it with a nod, wiping his hands and shoulders. Didn't think the clouds would hold this long. They usually don't where I come from. Storms hit hard and leave fast. You miss it, she leaned against the porch rail. Some of it. My mother's garden, the smell of lilacs in the spring, but not the rest. You ever think of planting here? I don't know if the ground would take it. He glanced toward the field beyond the barn. We could try. Got some seed sacks in the loft, never used them. Joetta tilted her head. You ever grow anything besides fence posts and calluses? Once tried squash. The rabbits were grateful. She laughed, quiet and sudden. It caught her off guard and her hand came up to cover her mouth. Seth smiled at the sound. Could fence off a patch near the well if you wanted. I'd like that. He nodded, then looked at her more carefully. You seem easier tonight, less like you're waiting for something to go wrong. I'm not sure it's ease, she said, more like. I finally believe this might last. Does that scare you? A little. It scares me too. She stepped closer, the reins soft on her shoulders. You've been patient. I know I haven't made things simple. I didn't want simple. I wanted real. Her eyes lifted to his, steady and clear. Then let me be honest with you. I'd welcome that. I stopped counting the miles we walked after Kansas. I stopped hoping for anything better than dry ground and 2 meals a day. But sleeping under your roof, watching you with my children, digging into this life even just a little, it's made me want again. And that's a dangerous thing when you don't know what's waiting on the other side. I'm not going anywhere, Joetta. I know. That's what makes the wanting feel different. Seth reached out slowly, giving her every chance to step back, but she didn't. His fingers found hers and her hand stayed in his. I won't rush you, he said, but I'll stand beside you. However long it takes. She looked down at their hands, then back at him. What if I've already decided? Then say it plain. She took a breath. I want to stay, not just tonight, not just till summer. I want to make a place here for them, for me. For us? The rain tapped louder on the roof, but neither of them moved. You sure? He asked. I'm sure. He didn't kiss her, not yet, but the space between them shifted, softened. Her hand tightened around his, and the answer was there, in the quiet, in the steadiness of her gaze. Inside, the fire burned low, and the children dreamed without fear for the first time in years. Outside, Joetta and Seth stood beneath the eaves, side by side, both still and certain in the hush before morning. The storm would pass. The earth would hold. And what they were building would take root, slow and sure, beneath their feet. By late April, the garden rose had taken shape. Joetta knelt beside the last furrow, pressing green bean seeds into soft earth, her palms caked with soil and the ache in her knees familiar but welcome. The children chattered nearby, Kira stringing wildflowers into a loop, while Camden practiced roping a stump with a length of old twine Seth had cut for him. The house looked different now, not in shape, but in feel. The windows had been washed, curtains sewn by Joetta's hand hung in the kitchen, and the scent of yeast bread often lingered long after supper. Seth came around the side of the barn, sleeves rolled, a crate of fence nails balanced under one arm. His gait was slow, not from weariness but care, a man who had never needed to hurry to prove his worth. "You've got near straight rows there," he said, setting the crate down on the porch. Joetta brushed the back of her wrist across her brow. "Mama always said food grows better when the lines are clean." She sounds like someone who knew what mattered. She did. She also said never trust a man who talks more than he listens. "Then I'm likely safe." Joetta looked up at him, her face shaded by the brim of her bonnet. "You listen more than most, but I still don't know what you've been waiting on." Seth stepped off the porch, boots pressing into the damp soil beside her. "I've been waiting on you to tell me what you want next." She stood slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. "I want permanence. Not borrowed kindness, not something that fades when times get lean." He didn't look away. "Is that what I've been to you, borrowed kindness?" "No," she said, "but I had to live like it might be, until now." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded square of linen. Inside was a tarnished wedding band plain, worn thin at the edges. "I carried this from Kansas to Arizona. Not because I wanted to keep the memory, but because I needed to remember who I wasn't anymore." Seth took the cloth gently when she offered it, and his thumb brushed the edge of the ring. "I'll bury it," she said, "under the mesquite near the fence line, where it can stay gone. You sure?" "I'm sure." He nodded, closing the cloth around it and tucking it into his vest pocket. "Then I'll see that it stays buried." The next day, with the children at the creek under Camden's watch, Joetta walked out with Seth to the fence line. They didn't speak as he dug the small hole. When she placed the bundle inside, the breeze lifted her hair from her neck and carried the faint scent of cottonwood. She pressed the soil down herself, slow and firm. They walked back in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because nothing needed to be said just yet. That evening, she set the table with the wildflowers Kira had braided. The stew was thick with salt pork and carrots, and Kira insisted everyone hold hands before eating. Seth's hand found Joetta's without hesitation, his fingers warm and steady against hers. After the children were asleep, Joetta stepped out to the porch and found Seth sharpening his whittling knife on a flat stone. He glanced up but didn't stop working. "I've been thinking," she said. About what it means to say yes to something permanent." He looked up, eyes catching the lantern glow. "And I'd like to build something with you, not just survive beside you." Seth wiped the blade clean and set it aside. "Then let's build it." She stepped forward, hands loose at her sides. "I never thought I'd want to marry again, but I do, not to forget the past, to outgrow it." He rose slowly. "Joetta Tilden," he said, voice low, "would you stay with me? Take my name if you want it. Raise those children here with me. Plant roots so deep the dust can't shake them loose." She reached for his hands. "Yes." He kissed her then, for the first time. It wasn't hurried or uncertain. It was the kind of kiss that knew its own weight, quiet, steady, and meant to last. They married 3 Sundays later, under the cottonwood by the creek, with Kira wearing a crown of sage and Camden clutching the ring Seth had carved from juniper. No guests but the birds and the wind. No preacher, only the promises they spoke aloud, simple and true. They built a new room on the house that spring, so the children could each have a bed. Joetta painted the door frame yellow, and Seth let her choose the curtains, even though they were bright as marigolds. He raised a new corral for the growing foal, now named Cricket, and Joetta taught Kira to braid a lead rope from horsehair. Camden took to the garden, proud of the rose that sprouted under his watch. By autumn, Joetta's sewing brought in coin enough for a new iron cookstove, and Seth's horses fetched fair prices in town. They made their living with calloused hands and quiet glances across supper tables, and mornings begun with shared coffee and soft voices. Joetta never buried her past. She carried it like a stone worn smooth in her pocket, heavy once, but no longer sharp. And Seth never asked her to forget. They grew together, in soil that held more than just seeds. They grew in laughter that came easier, in love that didn't need proving, in the simple act of waking each morning and choosing one another again. It wasn't luck that kept them. It was the slow, stubborn work of two people who'd lost too much to ever take peace for granted. And in the stillness of their home, beneath the Arizona sky, they built a life strong enough to hold them all.